By producing 5 video titles between 1991 and 1997, detailing railway operations in New Zealand during the steam era, the Memory Line partnership has created a lasting testimony of a way of life now rapidly becoming forgotten. The 3 filmmakers, each of whom has worked in the film industry for over 30 years, got together after they'd left their jobs at the National Film Unit. The 3 partners tell of their lives at the film unit and their subsequent experiences in the New Zealand film industry.
I joined the National Film Unit in 1962 at the age of 18 and had some very enjoyable years there. In those days were virtually given free rein to do what we wanted. We could suggest film ideas. We always had to do other productions that we were commissioned to make, etc. But in the time I was there, some of the most interesting work that I did was a film on the Remutaka Incline, which actually led ultimately to the establishment of Memory Line Productions 22 years later. Another great experience was making the 3-screen film for Expo 70, this is New Zealand, that I did. And as a partnership, writing it with and editing with Dave Jordan, and I was the principal director with 2 other directors, and Kit Rollings was doing the soundtrack. This is New Zealand made such an impact at Expo 70 in Osaka, Japan. It was decided as an experiment they'd exhibit it to a New Zealand audience. Well, the cinemas had to be specially converted to take the 3 projectors and the triple-track stereo sound system, which was pretty unusual for those days, and it was set up in major venues in Wellington, Christchurch, Auckland and Dunedin, and people flocked to it. In fact, I think over 500,000 people saw it, which at the time was something like 1/5 of the population. In 1984 I could see that things were not working well at Avalon, and I finally resigned after 22 years of being there, and I went out and set up my own production company. I was in Auckland. I think I was shooting a job for the Dairy Board, and I was talking to an old friend of mine who was in film distribution, and he was moving into video sell-through market. That's sales through Whitcoulls and places like that. And he'd taken one of the films that I produced at the film unit called War Years, and he'd made it into a VHS and advertised it, and it sold very, very successfully. And he said to me, "Is there anything else you can do like that? Are there any other kind of New Zealand history productions you could make?" And I immediately thought of all of the film that I'd kept from the shooting of the film on the Remutaka Incline in 1967. And I also thought of David and his interest and knowledge of rail history, and I thought of Kit and his abilities with stereo soundtracks. So I approached them and I said, let's see if we can make some of these for the sell-through market. It grew from that. We actually found that our films appealed just to average New Zealanders who's like to remember what things used to be like when they were young or when they lived in certain places. So we ended up making 5 productions over the years. The Memory Line productions have won about, I think it's 4 or 5 international awards. There was one award for the soundtrack for North Island Main Trunk at the US International Film and Video Festival. The productions have all been very successful, and they've been now reissued on DVD, and they'll be finding, we hope, a whole new sales of people who are unaware of the productions, or people who just want to replace their old VHS copies with brand new spruced up, higher quality DVD copies.
I began in the film industry in 1965 at the National Film Unit and worked right through all facets of recording sound on location, sound editing in the studio, and sound mixing, and even to transferring the final sound mix to optical negative for matching with the picture. So in the early years we had a lot of training in all areas of sound. I left the film unit after 20 years. I resigned as sound director and took up a career in freelance sound work, mainly sound editing and some recording, but mainly sound editing. And then when computers came along, that meant that there had to be a choice between location equipment and editing equipment, and the computer and the editing system was what I finally decided on, because there's a huge outlay in capital expenditure for whatever field you use now in sound, whether it's the computer or location recording equipment.
Well, I left Auckland University in 1966 and got a job as a production trainee at the National Film Unit, which was quite a good thing for me at that time, because the National Film Unit offered paid training and experience. And so very soon after I joined the Film Unit, I was out directing my own pictures when I was really a novice. I'm often working with much more experienced camera crews than I was, of course, and they helped us young people along. That's if you got on okay with the cameraman. And I worked with several very good cameramen, Brian Cross and Kel Fowler, who were legendary cameramen at that time in New Zealand, and I was very fortunate to be able to pick up the information and the experience which they passed on. So really, by the time I'd been at the Film Unit for a year or two, I'd actually been out directing pictures. I was writing scripts, narrations, I was editing films, writing treatments, choosing music, doing everything. That these days, I think I really feel sorry for young people these days, and they have not got the chances that we had at that time. And I was very fortunate to be thrown in at the deep end and making my own documentaries and getting a chance to have them entered in overseas film festivals and getting awards as well. So by the time I'd been at the Film Unit for a few years, I'd been making movies for, or I should say films for television and for cinema, tourist promotions, television commercials, drama eventually, the whole lot. And when the National Film Unit was sold in 1990, I'd been there over 20 years, and I'd probably had as much, if not more, experience than many people in New Zealand at that time. And it was a bit of a shock to all of us who'd been at the Film Unit for the place to be sold. A group of us got together and to produce and direct and make a variety of different projects. Some cases there were corporate videos and various other work that we'd been trained to do at the Film Unit. And one of these was the Memory Line series, which I got together with Hugh MacDonald and Kit Rawlings to make documentaries about New Zealand's social and transport history, using the old people who were still around, people of my parents' generation who were born around about the early part of the First World War.
In 2002, the partners accepted the task to recreate a trip over the Remutaka Railway Incline and set about producing a film utilising modern video and sound techniques to simulate the railway journey in the late 1940s. Since movie cameras were invented, film enthusiasts have been recording historic events. Many of them did not fully realise the lasting impact their films could make.
When the idea of making Remutaka 1949 came up, it was only possible because we had already met some of the early filmmakers, had some of the collections of these early archives that they had shot of the trains in the late 40s and early 1950s. Of those people whose films appear in Remutaka 1949, Jim Goggin is still alive. And some of that footage of his is some of the best material that was ever shot on the Remutaka Incline. He went to the Remutaka Incline with Joyce Galbraith and a few others, and he had a good 16mm camera and film, colour film. Not that the colour's relevant, because we haven't used colour in this movie. We've intentionally desaturated everything to make it look like old black and white movies. But Jim Goggin's footage is in there, and it is crucial and fundamental to some of the special effects that we have in the movie. Of the other people, When I was a kid, I met Dawson Wilkinson, who is somewhat older than I am. He was an accountant at the time. He went to the Remutaka Incline in the last months and filmed the trains on the incline. And his photography was a very high standard as well. He also shot 16mm colour using a Bolex camera, which shot very good images, as good images as you'll get on any movie camera today. I think probably another person worth noting is Joyce Galbraith. She didn't have access to 16mm camera. She used 8mm black and white camera and film. The interesting thing about Joyce was that she was the head of a camera club in Wellington, and she had very high standards of photography as well as an interest in telling stories. She also liked filming people. Many of the others got on with filming the trains, which was essential, of course, but Joyce got some of the shots of the locomotive depot and the firemen and the drivers and the cleaners and all those people who other photographers tended to ignore and overlook. Joyce managed to get Ray Holmes interested in firing H201 up to make several trips up and down the incline for her camera. And there are one or two of the shots which we've used in the movie of H201 coming directly towards the camera, almost up to a stage where it almost hit the camera lens. And that was thanks to Joyce and Ray's close teamwork that they managed to pull that shot off. They were able to film shots with the fill engine that were absolutely unique, including the shots, of course, of the engine coming into the Summit Tunnel. That shot was never shot before and certainly couldn't have been since. So between those people, we have a really unique record of the fill engines at work. With Remutaka 1949, what we were keen to do was to create an experience for our audience that no one else could have. For obvious reasons, you cannot travel on the incline at present, and the number of people who travel on it who have memories, of course, they're all getting quite old now because it is 50 years since the incline closed. So it was our intention to create for the visitors of the museum an experience of travel on the incline as close as it would be based upon the memories of people who I've spoken with. And my idea was to start the movie in the tunnel and to end the movie in the tunnel, because by going into the tunnel you're going into the past, a bit like The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, C.S. Lewis's classic story, where the children go through the cupboard and into Narnia and go into a different medium, a different time. And that's what we've done with Remutaka Incline. We're able to do that by going through the tunnel and into the past.